All right, everyone. Well, my name is Brittany Francis, and this is Rick Francis. We're so excited to share with y'all today.
No, definitely very excited to be here. Like Britt said, we're talking about the law of intuition, which is probably one of my favorite things to talk about in the leadership series because you know what? It is just something that everybody possesses intuition. It's just a matter of how much you can nurture it and lean into that intuition and apply that in everyday business settings and in just everyday life. So moving forward, we just really want to break down what Maxwell's speaking about in this law of intuition, and then also how you can apply this moving forward within your business.
Yeah, and here's the piece about intuition. As leaders, the better that we get at this law, the better we are as protectors for those who have been entrusted to us in our organizations, right? Because when you sense trouble or when you sense something good, you can transfer that over to the people that have been entrusted to you and you can teach them how to do the same. And so this is very, very key for you to be a leader of thousands upon millions of people. And this is also how you're going to gain the trust of others. So today we actually created a slideshow because intuition is just so key. It's so important. And we wanted to share with you pieces that you can actually screenshot and take with you and share with your team and really lead your team, because that's why we're doing this. Because the intuition piece of this is, you know what? If you lead with just your heart and not with intuition, it can get you into trouble.
Yep.
Right. And Danny knows that sometimes I can lead
Yeah.
with my heart. And so you have to find that balance.
Yeah, it's good balance between heart and fact. So when we start talking about leadership intuition, separates the greatest leaders from the ones who are merely good. This is something that is very true. You will always see some of your best leaders out there. They trust their gut. But you know what? It's not just when Brittany said when there's a difference between whether you're going with your heart and then also going off of your gut. Because some of the stuff when we talk about that intuition, it's not just from your heart and from what, but it's also got to be from what you've seen and other circumstances. So leaders see everything with leadership bias, and as a result, they instinctively know what to do. So this comes with repetition. This also comes with time. Now, everyone is capable of developing a degree of leadership intuition. No one starts at the same place. Some of us are born with a little more intuition than others, right? And it's just a natural thing. But this is something that can always be nurtured, right? And we talk about a mother's intuition, a woman's intuition, a man's intuition, but there's just so many things that we're intuitive by nature, and there's certain things that we know that will be there. And it's funny, and it's when, especially, and maybe you can speak to that as a mother, having intuition when it comes to that, it's just something that's natural.
That's
Correct.
natural. We were given it. God put it instilled in us specific intuitions that are very natural. What this law of intuition is keying into the unnatural and really allowing that to develop and be loud inside of you.
So question of the day, is your intuitive past your specific area of strength? This is your past experience. But the one thing is being a people person and understanding people, right? So that intuition, when you really start to understand people and you have a lot of experience dealing with people, you'll find yourself in very similar situations. You'll find yourself, and you can be in different locations in the country, right? I always tell Britt, when we moved out here to Houston from Albuquerque, it felt like I'd found the exact same people within the same wall of the dealership, and it was the similar personalities. But what that really was my past. Everything was starting to line up where you can start seeing stuff a lot clearer, and that whole vision becomes a lot easier to paint and to see because I've had that same type of personality before, and I've been in that situation before. I've been under those circumstances before. So once you've been through something a few times, you're not as rattled. And that is why, but you have to look back at yourself and see how clearly are you seeing that? Are you leaning into that intuition? Are you relying on that intuition? Are you trusting your intuition? But if you're not notating stuff that goes on in your past, if you're not remembering situations you've been in, if you're not remembering specific tones of voices, body language, body movements, the way somebody stands, the way somebody sits, the way when somebody gets uncomfortable, you hear their voice change. You have to be able to lean into all those things because that's so important for people, but that is so important in building this intuition. You're basically taking everything and you're stuffing it right into that intuition bank, and you're just learning and learning and learning more as you go on.
Okay, so knowing what it is as defined. Okay, this law states that successful leaders possess an innate ability to understand and interpret situations instinctively using our gut, our feelings, or our insight. And that gut is Holy Spirit.
Yes,
So much. So much.
100%.
Okay.
Now, this part, leader evaluates every situation with a leadership bias. So, what that means when you're looking at a situation and you're not tuned into your intuition, you may look at a situation and you're just looking at it at that situation. When you're really looking at it from a leadership bias, you're thinking about the team, you're thinking about the future, you're thinking about the overall greater good of absolutely everybody, and you're thinking about what the mission is at hand or whatever the objective is at hand, and is this helping you get to that objective? If is it derailing you from that objective? It's making sure that when you see every situation, you're not just seeing it for what it is in that moment. You always have to be looking ahead and what can that cause? What is the effect of whatever a situation is? But the good thing about intuition is it minimizes pressure in life, right? And I was watching a video on Maxwell when he's talking about intuition, and he's talking about a leader that is really looking everything through that leadership lens. And that's what we really mean by leadership bias, is viewing it through a leadership lens. He says, you know what? I, without a doubt, can beat the fastest man in the world. He says in a 100 yard race, I can beat that man. But he would need a 60-yard head start, right? As with most of us, we would like our odds to beat anybody if we had a 60-yard head start. That would be good. Maybe it might be a 70-yard head start. Doesn't matter what it is, but if you have that head start, that is what, when a great leader has
Mhm.
that intuition down put, that is the head start that they are getting. Because what you're seeing is you're not only addressing the situation at hand, but you're seeing tomorrow and the next day and the next day. You're seeing how this situation gets handled will predicate what's going to happen with that person the next time, and what's going to happen in the future and where it's going. So when you talk about that leadership lens, it's got to be, here's where we are, here's where we're going. Everything in between has got to line up with that. But if you can get ahead of that game by not only just trusting on facts, right? Because that's something you have to look at to be successful in anything. You need to know some data. You need to understand what the history is, but you've also got to use your heart. But when you're using that gut feeling and you're really leaning into that, it gives you such a head start. It allows you to minimize that pressure because you've already got ahead of something because you were expecting it. And that's the whole thing of intuition, is that expectancy when you see certain things and you have to trust in yourself. Now, at the same time, when you're early on in honing your skill of intuition, you also, and later on, but you need to verify that your intuition's correct.
Yes.
And
Yes.
that comes with asking questions and testing that intuition as something is progressing in real time. So that means anything that you ask needs to be a very specific question, and it should be an instinctive question that you're asking. So if you're trying to understand if your intuition is correct, you have to be able to drill down. And normally that's done with questions, right? If you really need to understand someone's motive. But that is the thing, is you minimize that pressure in life when you can lean into that intuition. And I always speak to it as parents, because there's plenty of times when, especially parents of teenagers, when there's kids that have come into our kids' lives, and there's just something off about this kid,
Mhm.
right? But you don't want to prejudge. Your gut decision said something's off, but then you always want to, you come back and say, oh, hang on, maybe I'm reading this wrong. But it only takes a couple questions to find out if your intuition was correct. So those are the things that need to be asked all the time.
Yeah.
But when you do that and you've put yourself, like I said, back to a leadership position, and we're talking in terms of business and you're talking in terms of growth, then those things, when they happen repeatedly and that repetition, you start to understand and you'll trust your gut. And sometimes you'll sit there and you wonder if you were wrong, but only time will tell. And time normally, when you have good intuition, is correct. Like,
Yeah. No, that's good. So when making decisions, recognize those intuitive thoughts or signals.
when you're leading others, it's not so much having that intuition for yourself, is when you're focused and you already know that part. So especially when we talk about this business, is you know when you have that person in your organization that is derailed quickly, right? You have that person that can be discouraged very easily. You have that person that can be very quick to just say, nah, I'm done with this, right? But if you're ahead of that and you're already getting there and you're already expecting that, like I said, that's that head start, you're already ahead of it because your intuition tells you at some point this is going to happen because history has told you that has happened prior, right? So that's where you want to be in front of it. And a prime example would be, picking up the phone, sending that text message, hey, call me, and getting ahead of them saying, hey, you know what? And the easiest way to do something like that is, hey, Brittany, what's going on? Oh, Britt, I was just having a little tough time. I made a couple phone calls and it didn't go my way. But you know what? I realize that we've got the greatest technology on our hands. It's not going to discourage me. I know there's more. And what I did is I'm speaking to her, but I'm using it through me, right? Because that's something that I know whether she's feeling that or not. My intuition will tell me that time will tell this. That's something she's going to go through. But if I can get ahead of it and already put that in there with a solution, meaning, hey,
Yes.
and because what you
Yes.
may see for somebody is they're about to walk through that valley. You just have to remind them they're going to get through it. So
Yeah.
if you can get to that before they do, that always helps. That is what gets somebody there, is when you know they're about to jump off that cliff, or they're heading into a meltdown Monday, right? But you can beat them to the punch and also paint that picture that they're just walking through it.
Yeah.
Then that gives you that head start.
So here's the piece that just really, when somebody comes into your heart or into your mind, what are you doing with that? That's a gift to you. That is a gift to you. And the more that you hone in on that, the more God is going to help you by giving you more and more and more, right? What we do with little, okay, if we're trusted with a little, then we can be trusted with much. So if we want to have huge intuition, if there's somebody that comes to our mind in our organization or in our life, are we picking up the phone and saying, hey, you came across my mind. Are you doing okay? How are you feeling? Right? That's a leader. That's being a leader and seeing things ahead of the game. So that is so good. So that piece, so tangibly, okay, so tangibly leading, that's the intuition, and that's the intuition piece. Now, what about the intangible? Okay, so I want to share something that happened just last week, and it was really interesting. I was praying and I was like, gosh, God, just give us a leader. Give us a leader. Give me somebody that's passionate. And I felt the word Birmingham. And it was like in my gut. It was just this gut word, Birmingham. So what would you all think? Birmingham, Alabama, right? So I was like, okay, there's somebody in Birmingham. And I was like, I don't know anybody in Birmingham. So I Googled Birmingham Holistic. Okay. And I was like, okay, so Birmingham Holistic. And I just thought, this is in my mind. This is in my gut. It was an overwhelming feeling. So I dial the number off of Google. There was a doctor on the other line, on the other side of the phone, who was literally hoping and looking for an opportunity to impact lives that was in Birmingham, United Kingdom. He signed up immediately on the spot, and we are impacting so many lives already together. That was an instinct. That was a gut. That was the Holy Spirit saying, look, you're asking for something. Are you going to listen? And so, all of these little pieces, leadership instinct, guess what? Now I can turn around and help those, right? That are inside our organization, of them saying, I don't have any more names. I don't know what to do. I've already called all the names in my. What is your gut saying? What are you hearing? What are you leading with? What are you listening to? What are you quietly sharing? Because God did not set us on this path to fail.
Mhm.
This was not put on our hearts to fail.
And very importantly, what you just heard Britt share with you is being very in tune to that quiet voice, being very in tune to the Holy Spirit to put Birmingham on her heart, right? And being from England, I know when she's gone, I said, how on earth that I said that guy does not sound like he's from
And he's
Alabama,
amazing.
right? But he's amazing. But you know what? If she wasn't steadfast and obedient to that quiet voice that she's hearing, her Holy Spirit, when he answered the phone and she realized, most people would have said, "Oh, I've called the wrong place. I'm sorry." Right? You would have been shaken or rattled by it. But instead, you leaned in, you pressed in, and you went with it because you were obedient to your gut and you just spoke just like it was like you meant to call him.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's getting rid of fear, right? So we have to eliminate that fear in order to lean into our instincts because we can let our fear mask what our gut is telling us, and that's not good.
So, when awareness of self and others. So, we reflect on past experience to identify patterns in decision making that led to success or failure. And it's very easy to look back and count our successes, right? It's
Right.
always very easy to look back and count our wins, but we also have to look back and see that failure. And you've got to back into that failure and see what was it that went wrong. And I've been there so many times, and so many times what happened when something went wrong is I went away from my intuition. I went away from what I knew. I went away because I was either distracted by something else. It was an outside noise, right? There's plenty of times we talk about facts and we talk about data, right? Especially in the business world. Is if you're making a decision based on data and based on that, you're forgetting the most important element, which is people. People is the
Hmm.
biggest asset you have. In this business, thank thank God that it's people is what we're dealing with, right? Sometimes it could be your biggest headache, but it's your biggest asset. And you know what? There's nothing better than people because at any given time, anything can just the trajectory can just shoot forward. But what you've got to look for is when something went wrong, were you trusting your gut? Were you trusting what you've learned and what you've been taught? Or was your head turned to something new? Was it something that, you maybe saw somebody else do? And maybe your vision was not clear because sometimes you have to, we talk about duplication, and we've had great people go before us, right? When we talk about Danny and Diane, we talk about Steve and Gina, and they've paved that way with success. Those are tried and true leaders, right? But sometimes the other stuff creeps in, and there's somebody who's maybe not a leader, doesn't have the same success, doesn't have the same track record. But you know what? What they're saying sounds really nice. And even though your gut says stay on track, this sounds like a great idea. Maybe we should start doing that. Let's try it out. And then guess what happens when it doesn't work? You have to reflect and say, where did we go wrong?
Yeah.
Right? Now, something we talk about is they sense attitudes. So these leaders, you've got to smell the success, or you got to see the problems coming beforehand,
With people.
right? With people, you have to be able to
Are
look
they a
at
good
that
fit?
and see if they fit into your organization, because I'll tell you, it doesn't take. It can take one bad apple, right, to spoil a lot of people. So you've got to have that sense of attitude. It's always a good place to know people's attitude, and you can always see where you
Their
stand with those
heart.
people. Their heart, it'll come pouring out, right? So the other thing, and this is one part I really like, awareness of yourself and others, body language, tone. But you'll always be able to see, and this is something very important when you're talking about the technology, you're talking to a prospect, and that's why I definitely love in-person meetings because you can read somebody's body language, right? Because what you're seeing is you can see a disconnect in body language, right? You can see that disconnect. You might see, the wife leaning in, hearing all about the patch, and the husband's being like Rick Francis with his arms folded, saying, "I don't want to hear this," right? That's a pretty obvious body language, right? Pretty obvious body language where you say, "Oh, you know what? That person's not tuned in." Right? And then you also start listening to the tone of people's voice,
Yep.
right? Britt and I went through this the other day. And when someone has to talk about something uncomfortable, their
They
tone
shift.
changes. They
They
shift.
shift.
It's almost like a physical, natural thing when someone gets uncomfortable and you have to talk about it. That tone changes, right? You can tell, even if you had your head down and eyes closed and somebody's sharing something that's going to be very emotional, you'll hear the tone change in their
Yes.
voice. When someone is excited about it and you hear them speed up and you hear just them get a little louder and you can hear that tone change. But when you ask somebody a question and they give you just a very uncertain no and the tone changes, you really need to pick up on that because that's going to show you when, if you need to give more information. Do you need to go back to the studies? Do you need to go back to the patent? Or do you need to go back to testimonies?
Or do you need to go back to the system? Right?
Exactly.
That's the other piece too. Do we need, so leading with that self-awareness and the awareness of others is so key because that is where that gut is going to go, oh, something's wrong, something doesn't feel right. Let's call them, let's check on them. So,
100%.
all right. Leaders are readers of their situation.
Yeah. So this is the most important stuff that brings up intuition, right? That you have to look at the trends. Are you utilizing all your resources, right? And you're readers of people and of yourself, most importantly. But you've got to be readers of people. Like I said, when you're reading someone's body language and that tone, that is absolutely everything. If you can really dial that in, that is something that is very powerful because you'll always know where you stand, because there's going to be a lot of people that sometimes will say something just to please you, and you wonder and you look back and say, hey, they sounded interested, now they ghosted us. But what you missed
Mm,
is the correct questions to ask to bring something more out of them. But you have to be able to read people, because I know there's, and us included, there's been plenty of times when people, they sounded interested, they sounded like they loved it, and then now you didn't hear about them and you're looking at them like, what just happened? Our intuition wasn't on point to realize that we needed to give them something else.
yeah.
So the words are just something where you hear it, because sometimes people will say something and really what they're doing, it's very clear, right? You walk into I do this all the time. I walk into a department store, I walk into a place and someone says, "Hey sir, can I help you?" "No, I'm fine. I'm just looking, thanks." When I don't know where it is. I don't know where I'm going. I should just ask a question. But you know what? It's just a factor. But you know what? With if that person has good intuition to know that I really don't know that, and they see that wander
Mhm.
and that look in my eyes, and as I'm scanning a room, they'll realize they need to ask me another question or they need to guide me in a certain way. They've got to ask me in a different way than an open, how can I help you? When someone says, oh, you know what? I need to think about. That's where you drill down, because when they say what do you need to think about, well, what is it? Or when you go home to think about it, is it more in terms of the study? Is it in terms of the phototherapy? Is it in terms of the business model? Which of those three is more of your concern? And what you're going to hear right then and there, and most importantly, what I just said, what you're going to hear and what you're going to process and discern is how they answer that question.
Mhm.
Not exactly what they say, because you've given them three options. They're going to pick one, but it's how they answer it. And you'll hear that in their tone. You'll hear how quickly they answer it or how sure they answer it. Right. And all you do is, if you're still not sure of their intuition, say, can you please expand on that just a little bit? Right. And these are similar things in that every day when you're
Everyday
talking about
life.
negotiating
Yeah.
and human interaction that we should be doing, because you'll learn so much about a person, but you'll also see that you've been in that situation before, right? And that's something, when you're negotiating, like I did for a long time, I'd heard it all. Every person who came out of the car lot was just looking, right? This is our first stop. We need to go home and do more research, right? But I'd already seen that's not true, right? I'd already seen the business cards in your car when I appraised it. I know you've been shopping around all over the place. I know you had no desire to be on a car lot at all. And I know you drove all the way because we have a car you want. So I have to tune out what they're saying and find out what is it that's making them comfortable.
Yeah.
What is it about the X39 that is really making them excited? What is it that's making them a little hesitant?
A little
So
fearful.
that's, you've got to, it's like I always say, you chew and spit, right? So you're listening to their words, but what you're really looking at is everything about what they're saying. And you're hearing the stuff in between those words.
So good. Okay. So application. Okay, adaptability. Leaders can pivot quickly in uncertain circumstances. So when uncertain circumstances happen, we can pivot because we already see it, that we already see, okay, if this happens, this is what the direction that we're going to go. So that's something that's important as leaders. We need to learn how to pivot, because guess what? If we are adaptable, then we don't transfer panic. to those that we're leading.
That's very true. And having that ability to stay calm, because when you get emotionally excited, it is very hard to stick with our intuition, right? That's why we don't do stuff out of anger. That's why we don't do stuff, in other situations when you have an emotion that is going to outweigh your your intuition. So, when I say somebody, jumps on a spin cycle like the Tasmanian devil and they're just spun up and they're spinning, as a leader, all you're doing is you're just slowing that spin down and you're facing them back to the direction we're going. This is where we're going. And you know what? But when you have to pivot, that's what happens especially with a team, is you're going to basically say, this is where we're all going on this train together this way. But you're going to have people that start spinning off and they're going this way. You corral them back in and you bring that back
Yep.
down. But you have to do that. And sometimes as a leader, what you're going to look at is you'll know when something is going just the wrong direction overall, and you've got to stop and make a change because something came off course. And that's the thing where you have to identify that issue early on. You have to be aware, but you have to trust your gut when something's not sitting right. And when I say trusting your gut and trusting that, is remember, you're viewing everything through a leadership lens. So it's not with yourself at the first part, it's the greater good, it's the team, it's everyone else around you.
Yep.
Because, like I said, people being your most important asset. If you can take care of people first, you will always be okay. You always want to take care of people first. That
Yep.
is the most important thing. Building trust within your team. That's going to build trust with you as a leader. But you know what? When you can move forward and you're not settled, because this is the hardest thing, is we all get emotional depending on the situation. But when we're emotional, right, that's when bad stuff happens. Right? If you're emotional, it's very hard to lean into your intuition. That's when people do stuff they wouldn't naturally do.
You're,
Because I'll tell you, anyone panicking, that doesn't do a good thing, because
yep.
everybody, if you're a leader and you're panicking, everybody's looking at you. You're the one driving the car, your team's in the back seat, your mom and dad, you're in the front seat. If the kids in the back see you panicking, guess what they're going to do? They're going to panic also.
Yep.
And now you just have absolute chaos.
Yep. So I love that because you said the car. You feel the right direction to take based on your insights. So you're going to be able to apply this to what is right for each organization within your team, right? You feel the right direction to take them based on your insights of the past.
Because that is something, when we talk about this, if you identify yourself, which I think everyone on this call should identify themselves as a leader,
Yes.
and you really feel like you've got great intuition, that is something that you also want to, people are going to see that within you, and they're going to learn from you as well. And that is also something that needs to be, you can't transfer the whole thing. It's just not going to happen, right? That's the part that Maxwell talks about, that not everyone's going to be at the same starting point when it comes to intuition. But if you nurture it and you hone in that skill, and you look at everything through a leadership lens, you can actually teach someone how to be very intuitive. And that comes from repetition, right? Because a lot of the stuff, like I said, it comes from, it's a good formula of the past, statistics,
Holy Spirit.
and Holy Spirit, and then you've got some other outlying factors. And the other outlying factors is really what's going to determine what that is. And that's going to be, but if you're able to be still in that moment and know that you've been there before, nothing's going to happen,
No.
right? And you'll
Yep.
make that right decision and you trust your intuition.
And you acknowledge that voice. You learn that voice. You learn that voice in your head. And once you know that voice in your head, nothing is going to scare you because you're going to say, okay, I just need to be quiet. I need to look. I need to assess where I am, where we're all at, where this team is at, what needs to happen. And the Holy Spirit's going to guide me and send me where I need to go. And I'm just going to look at everything and be wise. That's the biggest piece. Trusting the spirit, right? Trusting every single spirit that that is coming at you, right? Because when success is right around the corner is when things like to be thrown in your direction of this isn't going to work. This isn't good. This you got to silence all that noise
That's a good word.
and lean in to the peace. Okay? The peace. What gives you an instinctual peace in your gut about the direction that you're going?